Picture this. Terminal 5 at London Heathrow. One of the busiest airports in the world. Millions of passengers flow through these gleaming halls every year, each with their own story, their own destination, their own secrets tucked away in luggage compartments. But on this particular day in October 2022, women wheeled 7 suitcases through the departure area. And hidden within those cases was something that would eventually expose one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in British criminal history. It started like any other flight. 2 women, unremarkable in every way, carrying what appeared to be nothing more than vacation luggage. They moved through the terminal with the casual confidence of experienced travelers. The quiet check-in at Heathrow proceeded without incident. They calmly presented their tickets for a business-class flight to Dubai, their demeanor suggesting this was routine, perhaps even mundane. No questions were asked by airport staff. The bags rolled through security scanners without issue. No alarms sounded. No searches were conducted. The sophisticated 3D imaging systems that guard against explosives and weapons found nothing suspicious about the contents of those 7 cases. They took their seats in the business class cabin, settled in among the leather and luxury, and waited for takeoff. But inside those suitcases, beneath carefully arranged layers of clothes and toiletries, beneath the mundane detritus of ordinary travel, was something else entirely. Something that had been tightly packed and vacuum sealed with the precision of professionals who had done this many times before. The kind of weight that security scanners, for all their technological sophistication, simply weren't programmed to detect. No drugs, no weapons, no explosives or contraband that might threaten the safety of the aircraft or its passengers. Just millions in clean, untraceable cash. Sterling notes bundled with mechanical efficiency, wrapped in plastic, disguised with coffee grounds to fool detection dogs, and layered beneath the innocent facade of a girl's holiday to Dubai. This is the story of how a luxury courier network moved over £100 million from UK streets to the golden towers of Dubai. It's a tale that exposes the dark arteries of international money laundering, the sophisticated methods used to clean the proceeds of Britain's drug trade, and the quiet man who orchestrated it all from behind a curtain of respectability and diplomatic immunity. Before we dive deeper into this chill and true story, if you're fascinated by real crime documentaries like this, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you be watching from. Stories like these reveal the hidden networks that operate just beneath the surface of our everyday world. And there's so much more to uncover. The mastermind behind this operation didn't look like a kingpin. No notorious underworld reputation preceded him. No flashy criminal profile marked him as a person of interest. He was simply a quiet man from Dubai with a diplomatic surname and a passport that opened doors without questions. His name was Abdullah Muhammad Ali bin Bayat Alfalasi, and behind the veneer of legitimacy and the protection of international borders, he had built something unprecedented in the world of British organized crime. To understand how Alfalasi's network came to move such staggering amounts of criminal proceeds, we must first appreciate the context in which it operated. The years following the September 11th attacks had fundamentally transformed airport security, but this transformation was laser-focused on preventing terrorism. Every scanner, every protocol, every security measure was designed to detect threats that could bring down aircraft or harm passengers. Cash, however threatening to economic systems, and however criminal its origins, posed no immediate danger to aviation safety. It was, quite literally, invisible to the systems designed to keep air travel secure. This created what security experts would later describe as a regulatory blind spot, a gap between different areas of law enforcement that sophisticated criminals could exploit. While customs officials had the authority to investigate undeclared cash movements, the sheer volume of passengers and the focus on terrorism prevention meant that such investigations were largely reactive, triggered only when suspicious behavior was detected or intelligence provided specific leads. Dubai, meanwhile, had positioned itself as one of the world's premier financial centers, a gleaming metropolis built on the principle of asking few questions about the origin of the wealth that flowed through its golden doors. The Emirates' strategic location between Europe, Asia, and Africa, combined with its business-friendly regulations and limited transparency requirements, made it an ideal destination for those seeking to legitimize questionable funds. The gold trade, in particular, provided a perfect mechanism for converting cash into assets that could be easily transported, sold, or used as collateral for legitimate business ventures. Alfalasi understood these dynamics perhaps better than most. His background gave him insights into both the regulatory frameworks he needed to navigate and the cultural expectations that would allow him to operate without scrutiny. He started small, testing the waters with his own personal courier runs. On New Year's Day, 2020, he flew from Heathrow to Dubai carrying 11 suitcases and declared the equivalent of just under £700,000. It was a substantial sum, but within the legal limits that would avoid triggering automatic investigations. The declaration itself was a masterstroke by voluntarily reporting an amount just under the threshold that would mandate deeper scrutiny. He established a paper trail of compliance while testing the system's response. It wouldn't be the last time. Over the course of 10 carefully planned flights, Alfalasi personally carried nearly £6 million. Each journey a reconnaissance mission that taught him more about airport procedures, customs protocols, and the patterns of behavior that attracted attention. He learned which airlines offered the best baggage allowances, which departure times saw the lightest security presence, and which documentation would satisfy official requirements without raising suspicions. But Alfalasi was thinking bigger than personal courier runs could support. The drug trade in the United Kingdom generated hundreds of millions in cash proceeds every year, much of it in small denominations that were difficult to bank or legitimize. Criminal organizations faced a perpetual problem: how to convert these mountains of suspicious cash into assets they could actually use. Traditional money laundering methods, shell companies, casino schemes, real estate purchases, all left digital trails that increasingly sophisticated law enforcement agencies could follow. What was needed was something more direct, more analog, something that could move large amounts of cash physically from one jurisdiction to another without creating the electronic footprints that modern investigations relied upon. The method Alfalasi developed was elegantly simple in concept, but required sophisticated execution. Cash would be collected from criminal organizations across the United Kingdom. These funds, primarily proceeds from drug trafficking, would be consolidated, counted, and packaged for transport. Couriers would carry this cash on commercial flights to Dubai, where it would be converted to gold or other valuable commodities that could then be sold or traded through legitimate channels. For this service, Alfalasi charged criminal clients approximately 10% of the total amount moved. In return for this commission, he handled everything: the recruitment and management of couriers, the complex logistics of coordinating multiple simultaneous operations, the creation of front companies, and forged documentation that would satisfy customs requirements, the handling of funds on the Dubai end, converting cash to gold through established precious metals dealers, who asked few questions about the source of such substantial purchases. By the time his network reached full operational capacity, conservative estimates suggest that over £100 million had passed through the system. To put this figure in perspective, this single operation moved more criminal proceeds out of the United Kingdom than most major drug trafficking organizations generate in revenue over multiple years. It represented a quantum leap in the sophistication and scale of international money laundering, demonstrating how traditional criminal enterprises could leverage global financial systems and transportation networks to achieve unprecedented results. To make the operation appear legitimate, Alfalasi registered a company called Omniist Gold Trading. This corporate front provided the legal framework necessary to create convincing documentation for courier activities. Couriers would carry professionally produced letters claiming to be authorized cash transporters working on behalf of the business. These documents, complete with corporate letterhead, official stamps, and authoritative language, were designed to satisfy customs officials who might question why private individuals were traveling with such large amounts of currency. The sophistication of the operation extended to every detail of its execution. Alfalasi personally booked all flights for his couriers, accumulating substantial airline miles in the process, while maintaining direct control over their movements. He seated them in business class, not out of generosity, but because the higher service tier came with significantly increased baggage allowances up to 4 large suitcases per passenger, rather than the single bag typically permitted in economy class. He managed their itineraries remotely, coordinating arrivals and departures to ensure smooth handoffs while maintaining operational security through physical separation. But perhaps most crucially, Alfalasi himself remained distant from the day-to-day operations. Always in Dubai, always silent, always insulated from the activities that could directly implicate him in criminal wrongdoing. This physical separation was not merely about avoiding arrest. It was about creating plausible deniability, maintaining the image of a legitimate businessman who might have been unaware of how his corporate services were being misused by unscrupulous clients. This careful distance would protect him for nearly 2 years, as courier after courier moved millions in criminal proceeds through airports that were designed to detect bombs, not bank, but in the interconnected world of modern international crime. Even the most carefully constructed operations eventually face a moment of vulnerability, a single thread that, when pulled, can unravel everything. The woman who would ultimately bring down the entire operation had done this before, 3 times, to be exact, and each journey had proceeded without a hitch. Tara Hanlond, a recruitment manager from Leeds, had found what seemed to be the perfect side business. Each trip followed an identical pattern that had been refined through repetition and experience. Fly into Dubai, check into a luxurious resort, drop off the luggage at a predetermined location, enjoy a few days in the Arabian sunshine, and return home with several £1,000s in her pocket for what amounted to a brief holiday. No questions were asked, no inspections occurred, no complications arose. Just a few days in the sun, followed by a few days back in her normal life in Leeds, with enough extra money to make a real difference to her financial situation. It was, from her perspective, easy money, so easy that it seemed almost too good to be true. But for nearly a year, it had proven to be exactly as advertised. A simple, low-risk way to earn substantial sums for what appeared to be minimal work. The recruitment had been handled by Michelle Clark, a woman whose background made her particularly suited to managing such an operation. A former executive assistant at Sky Television, Clark had relocated to Dubai with her husband and children, ostensibly seeking new opportunities in one of the world's most dynamic business centers. On paper, the move represented a fresh start for the family, a chance to build a new life in a city that promised unlimited possibilities for those with ambition and vision. In reality, Clark had already begun building something else entirely. Something that would eventually span 2 continents and involve dozens of participants in what authorities would later describe as one of the most sophisticated cash smuggling operations ever uncovered in the United Kingdom. Clark's background in television production had given her organizational skills that proved invaluable in criminal enterprise. She understood logistics, deadlines, and the importance of managing multiple moving parts simultaneously. Her experience as an executive assistant had taught her the value of detailed planning, comprehensive documentation, and maintaining professional relationships with diverse groups of people. These skills, originally developed in the legitimate entertainment industry, translated remarkably well to the coordination of international money laundering. The transformation of these professional capabilities into criminal ones illustrates a broader phenomenon that law enforcement agencies have increasingly recognized in modern organized crime. Traditional criminal organizations, with their hierarchical structures and violent enforcement mechanisms, are increasingly being replaced or supplemented by more flexible networks of individuals who bring specialized professional skills to criminal enterprises. These white-collar criminals often prove far more effective than traditional criminal muscle because they understand how legitimate systems work and can exploit them from within. Clark's approach to recruitment reflected this professional sophistication, rather than targeting individuals with existing criminal records or obvious financial desperation. She focused on people who would blend seamlessly into the business-class lounges and 5-star hotels, where the operation needed to function. She looked for individuals with clean backgrounds, professional appearances, and the kind of social confidence that would allow them to interact with airport officials and customs agents without raising suspicion. The recruitment process itself was carefully managed through a combination of personal relationships and strategic introductions. Clark had maintained extensive social networks from her time in the television industry, and many of her initial recruits came from these professional circles. Others were approached through mutual friends or social events in Dubai's expatriate community. The pitch was always similar: a legitimate business opportunity with a reputable company, excellent compensation for minimal work, and the chance to enjoy luxury travel at someone else's expense. To maintain operational security and control, Clark created a group chat system that would become the nervous system of the entire network. The chat was named Sunshine and Lollipops, a designation so innocuous that even casual observers would assume it was nothing more than a social group for friends planning holidays together. The emoji-filled name and casual tone of communications helped disguise what was actually one of the most tightly controlled cash smuggling networks ever. Documented by British law enforcement, the Sunshine and Lollipops group represented a fascinating evolution in criminal communication strategies. Traditional organized crime had relied on face-to-face meetings, coded telephone conversations, and physical documents that could be destroyed if necessary. But the digital age offered new possibilities for both communication and operational security, provided these technologies were used with appropriate sophistication. Clark's use of encrypted messaging platforms reflected an understanding of both the capabilities and limitations of modern surveillance. By compartmentalizing information and limiting direct contact between participants, she created a structure that could continue operating even if individual components were compromised. Couriers never met each other or learned details about others' operations. Each participant received only the information necessary for their specific role, and all communication flowed through Clark herself. The group's operational protocols were meticulously designed to minimize risk while maximizing efficiency. Couriers were vetted and onboarded through personal interviews with Clark, who presented herself as a professional facilitator working for an established precious metals trading company. Once accepted into the network, they were added to the group chat and received detailed step-by-step instructions before each assignment. Every aspect of their journey was planned down to the hour, leaving nothing to chance or individual interpretation. The level of detail in these instructions reflected both the high stakes involved in Clark's understanding that successful operations required eliminating variables that could lead to unexpected complications. Couriers received specific guidance on when to arrive at airports, how to interact with check-in staff, what to say if questioned about their luggage, and even how to dress and behave to project the appropriate image of legitimate business travelers. The communication protocols were equally sophisticated. Participants were instructed to purchase Payasugo mobile phones that would be used exclusively for courier assignments. These burner phones provided an additional layer of operational security, ensuring that courier activities remained separate from participants' regular digital lives. After completing a run, couriers were told to wipe their devices completely and wait for Clark to make contact about future opportunities. This approach reflected an understanding of modern digital forensics that was remarkably advanced for a criminal organization. Law enforcement agencies increasingly relied on phone records, text message, histories, and social media communications to build cases against suspected criminals. By compartmentalizing digital communications and regularly disposing of devices, the network significantly reduced the digital trail that investigators could follow. All flight bookings were handled centrally through Clark, who used credit cards linked to Alfalasi's legitimate business operations. This centralization served multiple purposes. It maintained operational control, simplified accounting and payment processing, and created the appearance of legitimate business travel when examined by financial institutions or regulatory authorities. The use of Emirates business class flights was not merely about comfort. It was a calculated decision that provided higher baggage allowances, reinforcing the image of legitimate commercial activity. The choice of Emirates as the preferred airline also reflected strategic thinking about route optimization and regulatory environments. Emirates operated direct flights between major UK airports and Dubai, eliminating the complications that might arise from connections through third countries with different customs requirements or security protocols. The airline's reputation for luxury service and business-friendly policies made it a natural choice for travelers, claiming to be involved in precious metals, trading between the UK and UAE markets. In Dubai, the operations infrastructure was equally well developed. Handlers were positioned to meet arriving couriers at the airport, ensuring smooth transitions that minimized the time spent in customs areas where detailed questioning might occur. The handoff process was designed to be as brief and unremarkable as possible. Couriers would simply surrender their luggage to designated contacts and proceed to luxury accommodations where they could maintain the facade of being legitimate business travelers on company assignments. Most couriers never saw the cash again once it left their hands, a deliberate security measure that further compartmentalized the operation. By limiting each participant's knowledge to their specific role. Clark and Alfalasi created a structure that could withstand significant scrutiny without compromising the entire network. Even if individual couriers were arrested and chose to cooperate with authorities, they could only provide information about the limited aspects of the operation they had directly witnessed. Over time, the group grew substantially. More names were added to the chat. More trips were organized, but the fundamental rules remained constant. Don't ask questions about the broader operation. Don't speak to anyone outside the network about your activities. And don't deviate from the carefully planned procedures that had proven successful. Some participants followed these rules to the letter, treating their involvement as a professional obligation that required complete adherence to established protocols. Others, however, began to expand their own involvement by bringing in friends, relatives, and romantic partners. People they trusted but who had unbeen properly vetted through Clark's careful selection process. This expansion of the network beyond Clark's direct control would eventually prove to be its fatal weakness, creating new points of vulnerability that law enforcement could exploit. But in late 2020, as Tara Hanlon prepared for what she thought would be just another routine journey, the network was still operating at peak efficiency. Millions of pounds in criminal proceeds had been successfully transferred from the UK to Dubai. Dozens of flights had been completed without incident. The operation had achieved a level of scale and sophistication that represented a new benchmark in international money laundering. What nobody in the network realized was that their next flight would be different. This time, something had changed in the invisible world of law enforcement intelligence and airport security protocols. This time, border force officers would be watching. Detection dogs would be deployed, and the carefully constructed facade of legitimate business travel would finally crack under official scrutiny. October 3rd, 2020, began like countless other days at Terminal 5. The morning rush of business travelers moved through the departure procedures with practiced efficiency, each focused on their own destinations and agendas. Among them, 2 women wheeled 5 large suitcases toward the check-in counters, their demeanor suggesting nothing more unusual than a well-planned vacation. Tara Hanlon and her travel companion, Megan Reeves, presented themselves as friends, embarking on a girls' trip to Dubai, the kind of luxury getaway that had become increasingly popular among British women with disposable income and a desire for exotic experiences. The luggage they carried represented more than 60 kilograms of carefully packed contents, organized according to instructions that had been refined through months of successful operations. Inside those cases, cash bricks had been vacuum sealed and wrapped in coffee grounds to defeat the sensitive noses of detection dogs. Clothes were layered on top with mathematical precision, creating the visual impression of normal travel preparations. Air fresheners were strategically placed around the edges to further mask any suspicious odors that might attract attention. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual about their preparations or presentation. They had followed every protocol that had proven successful in previous operations. Their documentation was in order, their demeanor appropriately casual, and their cover story both believable and consistent with their appearance as affluent professional women. But this time, despite all their careful preparation, border force officers were already watching. The reasons for this surveillance would later become the subject of extensive analysis by both law enforcement professionals and academic research, studying the evolution of modern criminal detection methods in the post-9/11 security environment. Intelligence agencies had developed increasingly sophisticated methods for identifying patterns that might indicate criminal activity, even when individual elements of those patterns appeared entirely legitimate. Travel patterns, financial transactions, communication intercepts, and behavioral analysis were combined through advanced data processing systems that could identify statistical anomalies invisible to human observers. While each individual flight might appear routine, the aggregate pattern of multiple trips by the same individuals, particularly when combined with other intelligence indicators, could generate alerts that prompted closer examination. The detection dog that locked onto Hanlon's luggage represented the convergence of traditional investigative methods with modern intelligence analysis. These highly trained animals, capable of detecting trace amounts of substances that electronic equipment cannot identify, had been positioned based on intelligent suggestions that this particular flight might warrant additional scrutiny. When the dog signaled the presence of suspicious materials, Hanlon was immediately pulled into a side room for detailed questioning. The transition from routine traveler to suspect happened with startling speed. demonstrating how quickly the facade of legitimate travel could crumble under professional investigation. The room where she was questioned had been specifically designed for such encounters, isolated from public areas, equipped with recording equipment and staffed by officers trained in interview techniques designed to elicit truthful responses from individuals attempting to conceal criminal activity. Hanlan's initial responses followed the script she had been given for such situations. She claimed the bags contained only clothes and personal items. She professed ignorance about what her traveling companion might have packed. She insisted that she was simply going away for a recreational break and had no knowledge of anything suspicious or illegal about her journey. These responses, crafted to deflect suspicion while avoiding outright lies that could be easily disproven, had worked in previous encounters with customs officials. But this interrogation was different. The officers conducting the questioning had access to intelligence that previous customs encounters had lacked. They understood that they were dealing not with an isolated incident, but with what appeared to be part of a larger, ongoing operation. Their questions were more targeted, their follow-up more persistent, and their authority to conduct detailed searches more comprehensive than what routine customs checks typically involved. When the cases were finally opened and searched, they revealed their true contents: £1.9 million in sterling notes, carefully packaged and concealed exactly as intelligence reports had suggested. The discovery represented not just the interception of criminal proceeds, but confirmation that the intelligence methods being used to identify such operations were fundamentally sound. This successful detection would validate approaches that could be applied to other similar investigations. But the real breakthrough came when officers examined Hanlan's mobile phone. In the digital age, mobile devices have become the most revealing source of evidence in criminal investigations, containing detailed records of communications, travel patterns, financial transactions, and personal relationships that provide comprehensive insights into individuals, activities, and associations. The messages recovered from Hanlan's phone painted a detailed picture of an operation far more sophisticated than a single smuggling attempt. Text conversations with Michelle Clark revealed the systematic nature of their relationship, including detailed instructions about when to check in, what to say to officials, how to behave to avoid suspicion, and protocols for handling unexpected situations. More significantly, the phone contained evidence of Hanlan's previous trips, 3 journeys over the summer months that had successfully moved more than £3.5 million in total. These historical records demonstrated that the current arrest was not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing criminal enterprise that had been operating for months without detection. Perhaps most valuable from an investigative perspective were messages that revealed the network's expansion plans. Just days before her arrest, Hanlan had texted Clark requesting more recruits, specifically asking for 12 additional people who met particular criteria. They needed to be physically fit, discreet about their activities, and completely reliable under pressure. This communication provided investigators with crucial intelligence about the scale of operations the network was planning and the specific characteristics they prioritized when recruiting new participants. The criteria revealed in these messages also provided insights into the criminal psychology behind the operation. Physical fitness was necessary because of the substantial weight of currency luggage the couriers needed to manage through airports. Discretion was essential because any loose talk could compromise operational security. Reliability was crucial because the high-stakes nature of the operation left no room for participants who might panic, deviate from instructions, or fail to complete their assigned roles. Hanlan's arrest represented far more than the apprehension of a single courier. It provided investigators with a thread that, when pulled carefully, began to unravel an entire network of criminal activity. Each piece of evidence recovered from her phone and luggage pointed toward other participants, other operations, and ultimately toward the individuals responsible for coordinating the broader conspiracy. The National Crime Agency officers who took over the investigation understood that they were dealing with something unprecedented in their experience. The scale of the financial amounts involved, the sophistication of the operational methods, and the international scope of the network all suggested that this was not a typical money laundering case that could be resolved through standard investigative approaches. Instead, they were confronting what appeared to be a new evolution in organized crime, a network that combined traditional criminal objectives with modern business methods, international logistics capabilities, and professional-grade operational security. The investigation would require resources, expertise, and international cooperation on a scale rarely seen in British law enforcement. But before the full scope of the network could be understood, investigators needed to work systematically through each connection revealed by the evidence. Every name mentioned in Hanlon's communications needed to be identified and investigated. Every travel pattern needed to be analyzed for connections to other suspicious activities. Every financial transaction needed to be traced through banking systems that spanned multiple jurisdictions and regulatory frameworks. The process of building a comprehensive understanding of the network would take months of painstaking investigation, involving hundreds of officers, analysts, and international partners. Digital forensics experts would analyze thousands of communications. Financial investigators would trace millions of pounds through complex international transactions. Surveillance teams would monitor suspects across multiple countries. Most importantly, investigators needed to work carefully to avoid alerting other network participants that the operation had been compromised. If Clark or Alfalasi learned that Hanlon had been arrested and was cooperating with authorities, they might shut down the network, destroy evidence, or flee to jurisdictions where they would be beyond the reach of British law enforcement. The investigation that followed Hanlon's arrest would ultimately expose not just a money laundering network, but fundamental vulnerabilities in the international systems designed to prevent such activities. It would reveal how legitimate businesses, transportation networks, and financial institutions could be exploited by criminals who understood how to blend illegal activities with the facade of legitimate commerce. But in October 2020, as investigators began the complex process of mapping the network that Hanlon's arrest had revealed, they could not have anticipated the full scope of what they would eventually uncover. They were about to expose an operation that had moved more criminal proceeds out of the United Kingdom than any similar network in British history, orchestrated by individuals who had remained completely invisible to law enforcement despite operating on an unprecedented scale. The thread that Hanlon's arrest provided would eventually lead investigators across continents, through layers of corporate fronts and encrypted communications, and ultimately to a man who had built his criminal empire on the principle that the best place to hide was in plain sight, using diplomatic privilege and international business relationships to shield activities that were generating hundreds of millions in criminal profits. The name that emerged most frequently from Hanlon's communications was Michelle Clark, and with that discovery, the National Crime Agency realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple smuggling operation. Clark wasn't just another courier moving bags through airports. She was the operational nerve center of an international network that appeared to span multiple countries and involved dozens of participants. As investigators began building a comprehensive profile of Clark's activities, they uncovered a fascinating transformation from legitimate media professional to criminal facilitator. Her background as a Sky television executive assistant had provided her with organizational skills that translated remarkably well to managing complex illegal operations. The television industry had taught her to coordinate multiple projects simultaneously, manage diverse teams of freelance workers, and maintain detailed schedules under constant pressure to meet deadlines. These professional capabilities, originally developed in the legitimate entertainment sector, had been systematically adapted to the requirements of international money laundering, where she had once coordinated television production schedules. She now managed courier flight itineraries, where she had once handled communications between network executives and production teams. She now facilitated encrypted conversations between criminal clients and transport operatives. The Sunshine and Lollipops group chat that investigators discovered represented a masterclass in criminal communication security. Rather than using obviously coded language or criminal terminology that might attract attention from automated surveillance systems, Clark had created a communication environment that appeared entirely innocent to casual observers. The group's name, filled with cheerful emojis and positive imagery, suggested nothing more than friends planning social activities together. But beneath this innocent facade was a sophisticated command and control system that would have impressed military strategists. Every aspect of courier operations was coordinated through the group, with Clark issuing detailed instructions that covered not just logistical requirements, but behavioral expectations, contingency planning, and operational security protocols. The level of detail in these instructions revealed the extent to which Clark understood the vulnerabilities that could compromise criminal operations. Couriers received specific guidance on how to dress, how to interact with airline staff, what to say if questioned by customs officials, and even how to manage their facial expressions and body language to project confidence rather than nervousness. This attention to behavioral management reflected an understanding of modern security methods that extended far beyond traditional law enforcement approaches. Airport security personnel were trained not just to detect prohibited items, but to identify suspicious behavior patterns that might indicate criminal activity. Travelers who appeared nervous, evasive, or inconsistent in their responses to routine questions were more likely to be selected for additional screening. Clark's instructions were designed to help couriers navigate these behavioral assessments successfully. They were taught to project the confident, slightly bored demeanor of experienced business travelers who found airport procedures routine rather than stressful. They learned to answer questions about their travel plans with the kind of casual detail that suggested genuine familiarity with their supposed business activities. The requirement for couriers to use dedicated burner phones for each operation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of digital forensics capabilities. In the modern investigative environment, mobile device analysis had become one of the most powerful tools available to law enforcement agencies. Phones contained not just communication records, but location data, application usage patterns, and metadata that could reveal detailed insights into users' activities and associations. By requiring couriers to use devices dedicated exclusively to their criminal activities, and then dispose of those devices after each operation, Clark created a system that significantly limited the digital trail available to investigators. Even if law enforcement gained access to one courier's device, the information it contained would be limited to that individual's specific operations rather than revealing the broader network. The centralized booking system that Clark managed through Alfalasi's credit cards served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple payment processing. By maintaining control over all travel arrangements, Clark could ensure that operations remained coordinated and that potential conflicts or complications were identified and resolved before they could compromise missions. The consistent use of Emirates business class flights reflected careful analysis of airline policies and airport procedures. Business class passengers received higher baggage allowances, reducing the risk that weight limits might force couriers to travel with fewer cases than operations required. The premium service also meant that business class passengers were less likely to face detailed scrutiny from airline staff, who were focused on managing the more complex logistics of economy class travel. Emirates' direct flight routes between major UK airports and Dubai eliminated the complications that might arise from connections through third countries. Each additional airport transit created new opportunities for security screening, customs inspection, and potential delays that could compromise carefully timed operations. The airline's reputation for luxury service also reinforced the cover story that couriers were legitimate business travelers involved in high-value commercial activities. Precious metals, trading, the business that Alfalasi's company claimed to conduct, was exactly the kind of enterprise that would justify regular business-class travel between London and Dubai. As the investigation progressed, the scale of the network became increasingly apparent. Flight records revealed dozens of trips involving multiple couriers with baggage weights that consistently suggested far more than personal belongings. Financial records showed payment patterns that aligned perfectly with the operational timeline revealed by communications analysis, but perhaps most significantly, the investigation began revealing the network's client base. The criminal organizations that were using Clark and Alfalasi's services represented some of the most significant drug trafficking operations in the United Kingdom. These were not small-scale dealers looking to move modest profits, but major criminal enterprises that generated millions in cash proceeds and needed sophisticated laundering services to convert those proceeds into usable assets. The drug trade in the UK had evolved significantly in the decades following the establishment of major trafficking routes from South America, Asia, and other producing regions. What had once been a relatively disorganized market dominated by local dealers had become a sophisticated industry involving international supply chains, professional distribution networks, and corporate-style management structures. These modern drug trafficking organizations faced the same challenges as any cash-intensive business: how to manage large amounts of physical currency in a banking system designed to detect and report suspicious transactions, traditional money laundering methods, shell companies, casino schemes, real estate purchases, all created digital trails that increasingly sophisticated law enforcement agencies could follow. Physical transportation of cash offered a solution that bypassed many of these digital vulnerabilities, but it required the kind of logistical expertise and international connections that most criminal organizations lacked. Clark and Alfalasi's network provided these capabilities as a service, allowing drug trafficking groups to focus on their core business while outsourcing the complex problem of proceeds management. The 10% commission that Alfalasi charged for these services might have seemed substantial, but it represented excellent value for criminal organizations that would otherwise need to develop their own international laundering capabilities. Building the kind of network that Clark and Alfalasi had created would have required significant investment in recruitment, training, operational security, and international relationships. More importantly, using an established service provided criminal organizations with plausible deniability about the specific methods used to launder their proceeds. If the network was compromised, clients could claim that they had simply paid for legitimate precious metals transactions and had no knowledge of how their service provider actually operated. This separation between service provider and client also created challenges for law enforcement agencies attempting to build comprehensive cases against the criminal organizations that were funding the operation, even if investigators could prove that specific amounts had been moved through the network. Linking those movements to particular criminal enterprises required additional evidence that might be difficult to obtain. The international nature of the operation created additional complications for investigators. While British authorities had jurisdiction over the criminal activities that generated the cash being laundered, the actual laundering activities occurred in Dubai, where different laws, different procedures, and different international cooperation agreements applied. Dubai's position as a major international financial center was built partly on banking secrecy laws, business-friendly regulations that made it attractive to legitimate investors, but also created opportunities for those seeking to obscure the origins of their wealth. The Emirates' legal system was based on different principles than British common law, and its regulatory agencies operated under different mandates and priorities. This jurisdictional complexity meant that building a case against the network's leadership would require unprecedented cooperation between British and UAE authorities. Evidence would need to be shared across different legal systems. Witnesses would need to be interviewed under different procedural rules, and any prosecutions would need to satisfy the evidentiary requirements of multiple judicial systems. But investigators had one crucial advantage. The digital trail that Clark and her couriers had unknowingly created. Every message, every booking, every financial transaction had left electronic traces that could be analyzed, correlated, and used to build a comprehensive picture of the network's operations. As that analysis continued, one name began appearing with increasing frequency in the background of all these activities. Credit card records, corporate registrations, and financial transactions all pointed toward the same individual. A man who had remained carefully distant from day-to-day operations, but whose financial fingerprints were embedded throughout the network's infrastructure. Abdullah Alfalasi had built his criminal empire on the principle of maintaining plausible deniability about the specific activities his network conducted. But the very systems he had created to maintain operational control were now providing investigators with the evidence they needed to understand his central role in what was emerging as one of the most significant money laundering operations in British criminal history. The first domino had fallen with Hanlon's arrest, but it would not be the last. As National Crime Agency investigators methodically worked through the evidence recovered from her phone and luggage, each piece of information pointed toward other participants in the network. The careful operational security that had protected the organization for nearly 2 years was beginning to unravel, one connection at a time. The next arrest came just weeks after Hanlon's detention, demonstrating how quickly a well-constructed criminal network could collapse once investigators gained access to its communication systems. Jane Kamarate, Czech national, was intercepted at Heathrow, carrying luggage that contained £1.3 million in cash. The circumstances of his arrest were strikingly similar to Hanlon's experience. Same airline, same destination, same sophisticated packing methods designed to conceal currency from detection systems. But most telling of all was the forged paperwork he carried from Omnivest Gold Trading, the same company documentation that had been found in Hunland's possession. This connection provided investigators with crucial evidence that they were dealing not with isolated incidents, but with a coordinated operation using standardized procedures and documentation across multiple participants. Kamerit's arrest revealed another dimension of the network's recruitment strategy. Unlike Hanland, who had been recruited through social connections within the UK's professional community, Kamerit represented the network's expansion into European recruitment channels. His Czech nationality suggested that the operation had developed contacts across the European Union, potentially accessing a much larger pool of potential couriers who could travel freely to the UK and then onward to Dubai. The implications of this expanded recruitment base were significant for both the criminal network and law enforcement agencies attempting to combat it. European Union freedom of movement policies, designed to facilitate legitimate travel and commerce, had created opportunities for criminal networks to recruit participants from countries with different economic conditions, legal systems, and law enforcement capabilities. Citizens of Eastern European countries, where average incomes remain significantly lower than in Western Europe, might be particularly attracted to courier opportunities that offered substantial payments for what appeared to be minimal risk. The promise of business-class travel, luxury accommodations, and payments equivalent to months of regular salary could be compelling to individuals facing financial pressures in their home countries. From a law enforcement perspective, this international recruitment pattern created complex jurisdictional challenges. Investigating the full scope of the network now required cooperation not just between British and UAE authorities, but potentially with law enforcement agencies across multiple European Union member states. Each jurisdiction had its own legal procedures, evidence-sharing agreements, and prosecution standards that would need to be navigated. The sophistication of the operation became even more apparent as additional arrests followed. In March 2022, Joe Larvin and Jonathan Johnson were apprehended at Manchester Airport, but their detention was based on intelligence that had been developing for months. Border Force officials had flagged them during their earlier flights in August and September 2020, when they had successfully smuggled nearly £5 million between them across 2 separate journeys. The timing of their arrest revealed important aspects of the investigation strategy being employed by the National Crime Agency. Rather than moving immediately to arrest suspects as they were identified, investigators had been building comprehensive intelligence pictures that would support broader prosecutions against the entire network. This patient approach reflected an understanding that premature arrests might alert other participants and allow key figures to escape or destroy evidence. The decision to delay arrests also demonstrated confidence in the intelligence methods being used to monitor the network's activities. Investigators had developed sufficient insight into the operation's procedures and participant identities that they could track ongoing activities while building the comprehensive evidence base necessary for successful prosecutions. Johnson's background as an executive recruitment specialist added another layer of professional sophistication to the network's participant profile. His involvement suggested that the operation was attracting individuals with significant professional experience who understood business operations, risk management, and the importance of maintaining professional appearances while conducting potentially illegal activities. Text messages recovered from Johnson's phone revealed his awareness of the risks involved in courier activities. Before one flight, he had expressed concerns about the luggage looking ridiculous, but had proceeded with the operation anyway. This communication provided prosecutors with evidence that participants understood the suspicious nature of their activities while choosing to continue their involvement for financial gain. Amy Harrison's subsequent arrests expanded the investigation's scope beyond simple courier activities. Her involvement included not just carrying cash, but helping with logistics, packing procedures, and paperwork preparation. This deeper participation suggested that some network members had evolved beyond basic transportation roles to become operational specialists with detailed knowledge of the system's requirements. Harrison's multiple trips, involving more than £6 million across 15 suitcases, demonstrated the scale that individual participants could achieve within the network. Her evolution from courier to logistics coordinator illustrated how successful criminal networks develop specialized roles that maximize operational efficiency while distributing risk across multiple participants. Beatrice Ortiz arrest revealed yet another dimension of the network's sophistication. Rather than simply participating in courier runs, she had become involved in organizing operations for other participants. Her coordination of 16 separate trips alongside her own journeys showed how the network had developed middle management layers that reduced Clark's direct involvement in day-to-day operations while maintaining centralized control over strategic decisions. This organizational evolution reflected principles that legitimate businesses had long recognized. Successful scaling required delegation of operational responsibilities while maintaining strategic oversight. By developing trusted coordinators like Ati, the network could handle increased volume while reducing the risk that Clark's direct involvement in every operation might create vulnerabilities that law enforcement could exploit. The arrest of Nicola Essen, a 56-year-old from Leeds who had successfully completed multiple Havalia runs, demonstrated that the network's recruitment had extended across age demographics and professional backgrounds. The case of Mohammed Elis illustrated how even successful operations could create unexpected investigative opportunities. When one of his bags went missing in transit and was later recovered at Heathrow still containing £431,000, it provided investigators with physical evidence directly linking individual participants to specific cash amounts. This kind of concrete evidence was invaluable for prosecutors attempting to prove criminal intent beyond reasonable doubt. The lost bag incident also revealed something important about the network's operational procedures. Rather than implementing tracking systems that might create digital trails, the operation apparently relied on physical handoffs and informal communication to manage luggage movements. While this approach provided operational security benefits, it also created vulnerabilities when standard transportation procedures resulted in lost or misdirected baggage. Each arrest provided investigators with additional phones, communication records, and travel documentation that expanded their understanding of the network's full scope. Digital forensics analysis revealed similar patterns across all participants. Encrypted messaging, detailed operational instructions, standardized travel procedures, and financial payments that followed consistent patterns. But perhaps most importantly, every arrest pointed toward the same underlying infrastructure. The same credit cards funded flights. The same company letterhead appeared in forged documentation. The same Dubai contacts handled baggage collection. And increasingly, all roads led back to the same name: Abdullah Alfalasi. The accumulation of evidence linking Alfalasi to the network's operations created both opportunities and challenges for investigators. While they now had substantial proof of his central role in coordinating the money laundering scheme, he remained physically located in Dubai, protected by international borders and diplomatic considerations that complicated any potential prosecution. UAE-UK extradition procedures were complex and politically sensitive, particularly for cases involving individuals with potential diplomatic status or significant business connections within the emirates. Even if British authorities could present compelling evidence of criminal activity, securing Alfalasi's transfer to UK jurisdiction would require extensive legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. More problematically, the time required for extradition proceedings would provide Alfalasi with opportunities to destroy evidence, relocate assets, or simply disappear into jurisdictions where UK law enforcement had even less influence. The international nature of modern criminal networks created significant challenges for traditional law enforcement approaches that were designed to operate within clearly defined territorial boundaries. But investigators had learned to be patient, and their patience was about to be rewarded in an unexpected way. Sometimes the most carefully constructed criminal operations are undone not by sophisticated detective work or international cooperation agreements, but by simple human decisions that expose their architects to vulnerabilities they had worked years to avoid. In December 2021, for reasons that remain unclear but would prove to be catastrophic for his criminal empire, Abdullah Alfalasi made a decision that would transform him from an untouchable overseas criminal mastermind into a defendant in a British courtroom. He boarded a flight to London. The decision that would ultimately destroy Abdullah Alfalasi's criminal empire seemed, on the surface, entirely reasonable. In December 2021, nearly 2 years after his network had begun moving hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds from Britain to Dubai, he chose to visit London with his wife and children for what appeared to be nothing more than a family holiday during the year-end festivities. It's still unclear what motivated this journey. Perhaps he believed that his careful maintenance of distance from day-to-day operations had kept his name out of law enforcement databases. Perhaps he assumed that the arrests of various couriers had not revealed his central role in coordinating the network. Perhaps he simply missed the familiar comforts of London life and decided that the risks of travel were manageable after nearly 2 years of successful operations. Whatever his reasoning, the decision represented a fundamental miscalculation about the scope and sophistication of the investigation that had been building around his activities. The National Crime Agency had spent more than a year methodically mapping every aspect of the network, following financial trails, analyzing communication patterns, and building comprehensive evidence files that documented his role in what they now understood to be one of the largest money laundering operations in British criminal history. The family stayed at a high-end apartment in Belgravia, one of London's most exclusive neighborhoods, an accommodation owned by his in. The location choice reflected the confidence that had characterized his entire approach to criminal enterprise, hiding in plain sight, using legitimate wealth and social connections to deflect suspicion about the sources of his income. There were no aliases used, no attempts at disguise or concealment. The visit appeared to be exactly what it claimed to be: a successful Dubai businessman bringing his family to London for the holidays, staying in luxury accommodations that reflected his apparent prosperity and social status. From external appearances, nothing about the visit suggested anything other than the legitimate activities of an international entrepreneur. But the National Crime Agency was ready and waiting. The months of investigation had provided them with comprehensive evidence of Alfalasi's role in coordinating the money laundering network. They understood his methods, his contacts, and his procedures. Most importantly, they now had the opportunity they had been waiting for since the investigation began. Alfalasi was on British soil, subject to British law, and within the jurisdiction of British courts. The arrest was conducted quietly, without the dramatic confrontations that often characterize high-profile criminal apprehensions. Around lunchtime on what appeared to be an ordinary day, officers moved in on the Belgravia apartment and took Alfalasi into custody. The operation was designed to minimize public attention while ensuring that no evidence could be destroyed or disposed of during the arrest process. 3 mobile phones were seized during the arrest, and these devices would provide the final pieces of evidence necessary to complete the prosecution case. In the digital age, mobile devices have become the most comprehensive repositories of evidence about individuals, activities, and associations. Phones contain not just communication records, but photographs, location, data, financial information, and application usage patterns that can reveal detailed insights into users' lives and criminal activities. The contents of Alfalasi's phones exceeded even the investigators' expectations for comprehensive incriminating evidence. They found photographs of courier passports, suggesting that he maintained detailed records of network participants for operational security purposes. Text messages revealed his direct involvement in planning handovers, coordinating logistics, and managing the conversion of cash to gold in Dubai markets. Perhaps most damaging were the itineraries, packing lists, and suitcase photographs that documented his hands-on management of specific operations. These materials demonstrated that his role extended far beyond passive facilitation or unknowing involvement in activities conducted by subordinates. Instead, they revealed systematic, detailed planning and coordination that could only be interpreted as evidence of criminal leadership and intent. The discovery of these materials provided prosecutors with evidence that directly contradicted any potential defense strategy. Based on claims of ignorance or minimal involvement, the level of detail in the planning documents, combined with the photographic evidence of specific operations, established clear patterns of criminal behavior that extended over multiple years and involved dozens of separate incidents. When the case finally reached Isleworth Crown Court in the summer of 2022, it represented the culmination of one of the most complex international money laundering investigations in British law enforcement history. The prosecution case involved hundreds of pieces of evidence, testimony from multiple jurisdictions, and financial analysis that traced criminal proceeds through banking systems across several countries. Alfalasi's decision to plead guilty to charges of removing criminal property acknowledged the overwhelming strength of the evidence against him, while potentially reducing the severity of his eventual sentence. The guilty plea also avoided the need for a lengthy trial that would have required extensive international cooperation and might have revealed sensitive intelligence. Methods that, law enforcement agencies preferred to keep confidential. The amount of money involved in the charges, more than £100 million laundered out of the UK, represented a scale of criminal activity that judges rarely encounter in British courts. To put this figure in perspective, it exceeded the entire annual budgets of many local authorities and represented more money than most major corporations handle in liquid cash reserves. Judge S.'s description of the operation as a considerable network under your charge reflected judicial recognition that this case involved far more than simple money laundering. The systematic nature of the operation, its international scope, and its sophisticated procedures represented a form of criminal enterprise that challenged traditional approaches to punishment and deterrence. The sentence of 9 years and 7 months reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and the scale of the criminal proceeds involved. In British sentencing guidelines, money laundering penalties are calculated based on the amounts involved, the sophistication of the methods used, and the defendant's role in organizing criminal activities. Alfalasi's case satisfied the highest levels of each of these criteria. The confiscation order that followed the sentencing represented another crucial component of the justice process. The seizure of £2.5 million in assets, including luxury vehicles and expensive watches, served both punitive and practical purposes. It removed the proceeds of criminal activity from Alfalasi's control while sending a message to other potential criminals that successful prosecution would be followed by comprehensive asset recovery efforts. The specific assets seized: a Mercedes G63, a Ford pickup truck, and 3 Rolex watches reflected the lifestyle that criminal proceeds had funded. These luxury items represented the visible symbols of success that had helped maintain Alfalasi's cover as a legitimate businessman, while he coordinated international money laundering activities. The fact that the full amount of the confiscation order was paid demonstrated that law enforcement agencies had successfully identified and frozen assets that corresponded to criminal profits. This recovery rate was unusually high for international money laundering cases, where criminal proceeds are often moved through multiple jurisdictions and converted to assets that are difficult to trace or recover. The sentencing of other network participants revealed the hierarchical nature of criminal responsibility within the organization. Tara Hanlon, whose arrest had initiated the investigation that exposed the entire network, received 34 months in prison. Judge Curran Halt's observation that she had been vulnerable but knew what she was doing reflected the complex moral calculations involved in prosecuting individuals who played important but subordinate roles in criminal conspiracies. The variety of sentences imposed on different couriers reflected the court's recognition that participants had different levels of knowledge, involvement, and criminal responsibility. Those who had made single trips under deceptive recruitment practices received suspended sentences, while individuals who had made multiple trips or taken on organizational responsibilities received immediate custody. Estenek Kamarit's sentence of 2 years and 10 months for carrying over £1 million in cash reflected the seriousness with which British courts view large-scale money laundering, regardless of the defendant's nationality or apparent role as a subordinate participant. The case established important precedents for prosecuting international courier networks that use foreign nationals to transport criminal proceeds. The suspended sentences given to several participants, including Joe Larvin and Jonathan Johnson, reflected judicial recognition that some individuals had been recruited through deceptive practices and might not have fully understood the criminal nature of their activities. However, the fact that sentences were imposed at all demonstrated that claims of ignorance provided limited protection for individuals who chose to participate in obviously suspicious activities. Michelle Clark's continued absence from the proceedings highlighted the ongoing challenges that international criminal networks pose for traditional law enforcement approaches. Despite being identified as a central coordinator of the operation, she remained in the UAE, beyond the immediate reach of British authorities, and continuing to represent unfinished business in the case. Her situation illustrated how modern criminal networks can exploit international boundaries and jurisdictional limitations to protect key participants from prosecution, while the network itself had been dismantled and its leader imprisoned. The fact that other significant participants remained at liberty demonstrated the incomplete nature of justice in international criminal cases. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond the specific. The investigation had exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in the systems designed to prevent international money laundering, revealing how legitimate transportation networks, business structures, and financial institutions could be systematically exploited by sophisticated criminal organizations. The case demonstrated that traditional approaches to combating money laundering, focusing on digital transactions and banking system monitoring, were insufficient to address criminal networks that relied primarily on physical transportation of cash. The sophistication of the courier network's operational security had allowed it to operate successfully for nearly 2 years, despite moving amounts of money that should have attracted immediate attention from financial intelligence units. More troubling was the revelation that the network had operated successfully through some of the world's most security-conscious airports, including Heathrow, one of the most monitored transportation hubs on Earth. The fact that dozens of flights carrying millions in criminal proceeds had passed through multiple layers of security screening highlighted gaps in current detection capabilities that other criminal organizations might be able to exploit. The case also raised important questions about the effectiveness of international cooperation in combating organized crime. While British authorities had ultimately succeeded in prosecuting the network's leadership, this success had required extraordinary investigative resources and had been achieved only through a combination of sophisticated intelligence work and fortunate circumstances that brought key defendants within British jurisdiction. The investigation had revealed that Dubai's position as an international financial center, while providing legitimate benefits for global commerce, also created opportunities for criminal networks that were difficult for any single jurisdiction to address effectively. The Emirates' business-friendly regulations and limited transparency requirements made it an attractive destination for those seeking to legitimize questionable funds, but also complicated efforts to trace and recover criminal proceeds. As the sentences were handed down and the immediate justice process concluded, investigators and policymakers were already analyzing the lessons learned from the case to improve future prevention and detection capabilities. The Alfalasi network had demonstrated new levels of sophistication in international money laundering, and law enforcement agencies needed to evolve their approaches to address similar threats. But perhaps the most important message sent by the case was that even the most carefully constructed criminal enterprises ultimately face vulnerabilities that determined investigators can exploit. The network that had seemed virtually invisible for nearly 2 years had been completely dismantled through patient detective work, international cooperation, and the kind of comprehensive investigation that modern organized crime requires. The story of Abdullah Alfalasi and his courier network serves as both a cautionary tale about the evolving sophistication of international crime and a demonstration of law enforcement, its capacity to adapt to new criminal methods. In an era where criminal organizations increasingly operate across borders and exploit legitimate systems for illegal purposes, the case provides both sobering insights into current vulnerabilities and reassuring evidence that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail against even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. The hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds that flowed through this network represented the profits from drug trafficking, operations that cause immeasurable harm to communities across the United Kingdom. The successful prosecution of those responsible for laundering these funds struck a significant blow against the financial infrastructure that enables organized crime to flourish. But the case also reminds us that in our interconnected world, criminal networks will continue to evolve, finding new ways to exploit the systems and technologies that facilitate legitimate international commerce. The ongoing battle between criminal innovation and law enforcement adaptation ensures that cases like this will continue to emerge, each teaching new lessons about the persistent challenges of maintaining justice in an age of global crime. What do you think about this extraordinary case of international money laundering? The scale of the operation, the sophistication of the methods used, and the international cooperation required to bring the perpetrators to justice represent some of the most significant challenges facing modern law enforcement. The sentences handed down reflect both the seriousness of these crimes and the determination of the justice system to hold accountable those who facilitate organized crime through such elaborate schemes.